After years of trying for a baby, my wife finally got pregnant. I was overjoyed until I discovered a medical report that exposed her ultimate betrayal. If there was ever a moment in my life where I felt truly, overwhelmingly happy, it was the night my wife told me she was pregnant. For 2 years, Hannah and I had been trying to have a baby. We had followed every rule, every cycle, every piece of advice, and yet each month ended in disappointment. The negative tests piled up, and with them, so did the stress. At first, it was manageable. We reassured each other, made jokes about needing to practice more. But after the first year, the frustration set in. Hope turned into expectation. Expectation turned into failure. Failure turned into something worse. Resentment. We went to see a doctor, hoping for an answer. A full fertility checkup. Countless tests. A week later, we sat in the doctor's office, fingers intertwined, barely breathing as we waited for the results. When he finally spoke, it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted. "You're both perfectly healthy," he said, smiling. "There's no medical reason why you can't conceive naturally." Relief, joy, a renewed sense of hope. But in hindsight, maybe that's where things really started to fall apart. If there was nothing physically wrong with us, then why wasn't it happening? The pressure grew unbearable. Our conversations became shorter. Our nights became colder. At some point, I stopped reaching for her in bed, and she stopped waiting for me to. Months passed, and we barely touched each other anymore. I told myself it was just a phase, that one day we'd get back to how things were, that all of this would be worth it when we finally had our child. Then, one night, everything changed. I had just gotten home from work expecting another quiet evening. Instead, Hannah was standing in the kitchen, eyes red, hands trembling. I froze, immediately concerned. "What's wrong?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She took a shaky breath, then exhaled a whisper. "I'm pregnant." For a second, I couldn't move. Then the joy hit me, a happiness so overwhelming it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. I rushed forward, gathering her in my arms, holding her tightly as a mix of laughter and tears escaped me. "Are you serious?" I whispered, my voice shaking. She nodded against my chest, clinging to me just as desperately. I didn't know I was crying until she reached up to wipe a tear from my cheek. This was it. This was the moment we had been waiting for. The stress, the fights, the months of uncertainty, it was all behind us. We had made it. That night, we talked for hours, making plans for the future. Nursery ideas, baby names, parenting styles. I held her close as we fell asleep, feeling like I had been given a second chance at happiness. I should have known that happiness like that doesn't last. 2 weeks later, I took Hannah to her first ultrasound appointment. I was practically buzzing with excitement, squeezing her hand as we sat in the waiting room. She gave me a small, amused smile. "You look more nervous than I do." "I'm just excited," I admitted. When they finally called us in, I nearly jumped out of my seat. The doctor greeted us warmly, made small talk as he prepped the machine. Hannah lay back, pulling up her shirt slightly as he applied the cool gel to her stomach. I held my breath. And then, the sound of our baby's heartbeat filled the room, a tiny, flickering rhythm, the first real sign of life. I felt something deep inside me shift. I turned to Hannah, expecting to see the same awe in her eyes, and I did, except for just a second, something else flickered there. Something hesitant. And then I noticed the doctor. His fingers hesitated slightly over the machine. His lips parted like he was about to say something, then closed again. Then, so quickly I almost missed it, his gaze flicked toward me. It was subtle, a glance, a moment of hesitation, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I opened my mouth to ask if everything was okay. Then the doctor smiled. "Everything looks great," he said, adjusting the screen. "Baby is developing well." The tension melted away as quickly as it came. Of course, everything was fine. I was just overthinking. Hannah gave my hand a squeeze, and I turned back to her, the sound of our baby's heartbeat washing away my doubts. Later, I would remember that look. I would wonder why I didn't question it, why I let my happiness blind me. But in that moment, I had everything I ever wanted, and I wasn't ready to question it. It started with something simple, something I could have ignored. I had the day off and decided to clean up the home office, an overdue task that Hannah and I had both been putting off for months. It was the kind of mundane thing that I wouldn't even remember doing, except for what I found that day. A stack of old papers, medical bills, a few bank statements, and then our fertility test results. I nearly put them aside without a second glance, but then something caught my eye. The paper in my hands, it wasn't what I remembered. I frowned, unfolding it completely, and then my entire world tilted. There, in bold letters, was a sentence that made my heart stop. Patient shows signs of infertility due to low sperm motility, natural conception unlikely. I blinked. Read it again. My hands tightened around the edges of the paper as my pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't what the doctor told us. I remembered sitting in that office with Hannah, holding her hand, waiting for the results. I remembered the doctor's reassuring smile, his exact words, "You're both perfectly healthy. There's no medical reason you can't conceive naturally." So, why the hell was I holding a document that said otherwise? A cold wave of nausea washed over me. No, there had to be an explanation. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the report, then pulled up Hannah's contact. My fingers hovered over the call button. Then I stopped. Hannah knew. She had to know. Which meant she lied. The air felt thick around me. My own breathing sounded foreign, ragged. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady myself. And then the most horrifying thought of all crept in. Hannah was pregnant, but I was infertile. The ground beneath me felt like it was crumbling. I stumbled back into the chair, gripping the edges of the desk like it was the only thing keeping me upright. This can't be happening. The baby isn't mine. I didn't remember walking into the kitchen. One moment, I was staring at the paper, my entire reality unraveling, and the next, I was standing in front of Hannah as she stirred something on the stove. She turned, smiling when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early." I held up the paper. Her smile froze. The color drained from her face so fast that, for a moment, I thought she might faint. "Hannah?" My voice didn't even sound like mine. "What is this?" She didn't answer. She didn't even try to play dumb. She just stared at the paper, her hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then she swallowed. "I can explain," I laughed, a broken, humorless sound. "Explain?" My voice was shaking, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lied to me. She squeezed her eyes shut. "I didn't lie, I didn't tell you the full truth." I felt something snap inside me. I slammed the paper onto the counter. "You told me we were fine, that the doctor said we could have kids naturally. You let me believe that." "I didn't want you to give up," she blurted out, her voice raw. I froze. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I saw how much it was breaking you, how every month you looked more and more defeated. I couldn't stand it, okay? I thought if I told you everything was fine, then maybe you'd still have hope." Hope, she said it like she had done this for me, like she had been protecting me. I felt sick. I shook my head slowly. "So you lied." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because there was no excuse. My chest ached with something I couldn't describe. Betrayal, grief, a loss I couldn't yet process. But even through the pain, something still didn't make sense. I glanced at her stomach, the small swell of a baby growing inside her. She had lied about my fertility, but that didn't explain everything. I swallowed hard. Who is the father? The kitchen fell silent. For a long moment, Hannah didn't move. Then her lips parted and a sound came out, somewhere between a sob and a gasp for air. "Hannah." My voice was barely above a whisper now. "Tell me the truth." She took a step back, pressing a hand against her stomach. Her whole body was trembling, and in that moment, I already knew. I knew that whatever she was about to say would break me. She squeezed her eyes shut. "I didn't want you to be hurt." My heart pounded, so I made a decision. My stomach dropped. "I wanted the baby to be in your bloodline," she whispered. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. No, she couldn't mean. My throat closed up. "Hannah." She finally looked at me, her entire body shaking, and said the words that ended me. "I asked your brother for help." The world blurred. The sound of my own heartbeat roared in my ears. I took a step back, nearly knocking into the counter. My brother. My own brother. My mind scrambled for explanations for any possible way this wasn't real. You mean he helped you find a donor?" My voice cracked. "You don't mean..." But the look on her face told me everything. No medical donor. No misunderstanding. She had slept with him. She had gone to my own blood, my own family, and let him do what I never could. My stomach twisted violently. I turned away, gripping the sink, struggling to breathe. Hannah, I whispered, my voice hoarse. How could you do this? Tears streamed down her face. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought. I spun around so fast she flinched. The right thing? My voice was shaking with rage. You think this is the right thing? She sobbed harder. I didn't know how else to... To what? My vision blurred. To betray me? The pain in my chest was unbearable. Everything was a lie. The pregnancy. The past few months. Every moment I had spent dreaming about our child. It had never been mine to begin with. I turned away from her. I needed to move, to leave, to breathe. Honey, please, she begged. Please don't. I walked out of the kitchen. Out of the house. Into a night that had never felt colder. And as I stood there shaking, one thought echoed through my mind. She lied to me. He betrayed me. And I will never forgive them. I don't remember much about that night. I remember stepping out of the house, gasping for air, my mind caught in an endless loop of Hannah's words. I wanted the baby to be in your bloodline. I asked your brother for help. I must have walked for hours. I don't know how long. My legs carried me through the empty streets, but I didn't feel the cold, didn't hear the passing cars. All I could feel was the weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall or break things or throw a fit. I just shut down. Something inside me had cracked open, and all I could do was exist in the empty space it left behind. The betrayal was too big. Too much. Hannah had done this. My own brother had done this. And they had kept it from me. For how long? How many nights had they sat across from me, laughing at family dinners, knowing what they had done? How many times had I kissed my wife, held her in my arms, promised her a future, while she already had someone else's child growing inside her? I felt sick. I don't know how I ended up at my parents' house. I don't remember unlocking the door or stumbling into the dark living room. I just remember sitting there, in silence, staring at nothing. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do next. I was stuck between two impossible options. Option 1, stay silent, raise the baby as my own. Pretend none of this ever happened. The child was still my bloodline, my brother's, but not a stranger's. And what if this was my only chance? What if I never got to be a father? Could I swallow the pain? Could I bury the betrayal deep enough that I could live with it? Or, option 2, expose everything. Tell my sister-in-law the truth. Destroy my brother's marriage the way he had destroyed mine. Let the whole family see what Hannah and my brother had done. But if I did that, the consequences would be permanent. There would be no fixing it. No going back. My parents would be devastated. The entire family would be shattered. And the baby would be born into chaos, into a world where their father was a coward and their mother was a liar. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands trembled. There was no winning. No matter what I did, I lost something. 2 days passed before I went home. I wasn't ready to see Hannah, but I had to. The moment I walked through the door, she ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist, sobbing into my chest. I thought you weren't coming back, she whispered. I didn't hug her back. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, cold and empty, as she cried. Then she pulled away, looking up at me with swollen, red-rimmed eyes. Please, she begged. I know I hurt you. I know I lied. But I love you. I need you. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. You don't need me, Hannah. You need someone who can be the father of your child. You are the father, she insisted. You can be. You don't have to walk away. I stared at her, stunned by how easily the words left her mouth. Did she actually believe that? Did she think I could just forget? I shook my head, stepping back. Hannah, you planned this. You chose this. Tears ran down her face. I was desperate. I wanted a family with you, but I clenched my jaw. So you slept with my brother? She flinched. It wasn't like that. I asked him to help, and he... Stop. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't listen to this anymore. You can't twist this into something noble. You can't make this sound like you did it for me. She broke down into more sobs, and I felt nothing. Then she whispered, What are you gonna do? And there it was. The real question. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she didn't know what came next. Because she was afraid of what I might do. Because she knew she deserved to lose everything. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the front door opened. And my brother walked in. He stopped the moment he saw me, We stared at each other in silence. Then he sighed and ran a hand down his face. I was hoping we'd talk sooner. I laughed, a cold, empty laugh. Oh, were you? I know you're angry. His voice was calm, like he was trying to be the reasonable one. Angry? I repeated. I'm beyond angry, you son of a bitch, he exhaled. Look, man. Don't. I stepped forward, rage burning through my veins. Don't you dare talk to me like we're friends. He had the audacity to look guilty. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I snapped. You didn't just sleep with my wife, you helped her lie to me. I was trying to help, he muttered. My blood ran hot. You were trying to help? You were trying to help? Because I could barely breathe, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said quietly. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to destroy something. Instead, I just whispered, you ruined my life. He looked down. I know. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Do you? Silence. Then he said, are you going to tell her? It took me a second to realize what he meant. My sister-in-law. I looked at him, my heart pounding. She deserves to know, I said, voice hollow. Panic flashed across his face. Please, he murmured. Think about this. Think about what this will do. I had been thinking about it. For days, it was all I could think about. He reached for my shoulder, but I jerked away. Hannah told me she needed me, I said, my voice cold. And you know what? Maybe she's right. He exhaled in relief. Too soon. But you don't deserve that luxury, I spat. I turned to Hannah, my decision made. I won't say anything, yet. Her shoulders sagged in relief. But if you ever try to manipulate me again, if either of you try to guilt me into staying, I will burn everything to the ground. Then I walked out, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew what came next, because I had already made my choice. I had made my choice. For days I had been trapped in a fog of anger and betrayal, torn between two impossible paths. But as I walked away from Hannah and my brother that night, something inside me finally settled. I wasn't going to stay silent. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The truth would come out, and I would be the one to bring it to light. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in days. The weight of indecision was gone, replaced by a cold, unwavering clarity. I had slept at my parents' house again, avoiding Hannah's calls. I hadn't told them anything yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation. But there was someone who deserved to know the truth. My sister-in-law. I had wrestled with the idea of telling her for days, questioning if it was really my place to ruin her marriage the way mine had been ruined. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't the one tearing this family apart. They were. I was just stopping the lie. So I picked up my phone, took a deep breath, and called her. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said, her voice warm. I haven't seen you in a while. Everything okay? My throat tightened. No, nothing was okay. I need to talk to you, I said, in person. There was a brief pause. Is everything all right? I hesitated. No, but you deserve to know the truth. She didn't ask any more questions. Just told me to come over, and so I did. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the look on my face. We sat down in the living room, and I wasted no time. I'm just going to say it, I muttered, gripping my knees. Hannah's baby isn't mine. She blinked. What? I swallowed hard. I'm infertile. We didn't know until recently. Hannah's pregnant, but it's not mine. Her face paled. She shook her head slowly, like she was trying to process my words. Then, whose is it? I didn't have to say it. She already knew. Her lips parted in a silent gasp, her hands clenching into fists. No, she whispered. You're lying. I wish I was. She shot up from the couch, pacing back and forth. Her breathing grew shallow, her entire body trembling. No, she repeated, shaking her head furiously. He wouldn't. He couldn't. I didn't say anything, because I had been in that same place just days ago, desperately hoping there was another explanation. But there wasn't. Tears filled her eyes. How do you know? I pulled out my phone and showed her the fertility test. Then the second test. Her gaze flicked across the screen, her face contorting with pain. And then, just like that, something in her shattered. She covered her mouth with both hands and let out a broken sob. I had expected anger, rage, screaming. Instead, she crumpled onto the couch, shaking as quiet sobs racked her body. I sat there, unable to do anything. For the first time, I felt guilty, not for telling her the truth, but for being the one to break her world apart. I'm sorry, I whispered. She didn't look at me, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. Everything unraveled quickly after that. My sister-in-law confronted my brother that night. I don't know what was said, I didn't ask, but I do know that within 24 hours she had packed up her things and left. My brother called me over and over again, but I ignored him. Hannah texted me repeatedly, begging me to come home. I didn't respond. The fallout spread like wildfire. Within days, the entire family knew. My parents were devastated, my mother crying on the phone as she asked me how this could happen. My father was furious, demanding answers from both Hannah and my brother. But I didn't care anymore. I was done. I filed for divorce the same week. Hannah didn't fight it. She barely spoke when we met to sign the papers, her once bright, confident demeanor now dull and lifeless. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her break. Only emptiness. My brother didn't try to apologize, not directly, but he sent me one last text. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Months passed. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild my life. I moved out of the city, started fresh somewhere no one knew me. The nightmares stopped. The weight on my chest grew lighter. One evening as I was leaving work, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message. It was a picture. A newborn baby. At the bottom, just 4 words. I hope you're okay. I stared at the screen for a long time. For a moment, something inside me twisted painfully. Not anger, not resentment, just sadness. I hovered my thumb over the message, then, without responding, I deleted it, and I never looked back.